Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb Cousens. I am a co-founder and CEO at Adamas Esports, and we are so excited to be hosting the Esports Performance Series the next few Mondays. We've got some great guests and topics lined up, and as a reminder, this is the first of 4 panels we have, so make sure to follow the channel so that you don't miss them in the next few weeks. A few words on Adamas, and then we're going to get started. So Adamas is a global leader in training and measuring esports performance. We work with some of the leading teams all over the world, and we fuel the peak performance of world-class organizations. We empower coaches to lead their teams to optimal performance, and we develop skills and habits that increase an athlete's performance and longevity. And longevity is one of today's topics in the esports health and injury prevention panel. And I'm really looking forward to this chat with our 3 distinguished guests. If I can ask you to each take 30 to 60 seconds now to share with everyone who you are and a little bit about what your background is, we can get started. So, Summer, why don't you start us off?
Hey, so yes, I'm Summer Scott. I am the director of team operations at Logic Gaming. So what that practically means is that I run the show for all of our non-LCS teams that we have here. My background is actually coming from the performance coaching aspect of things. When I first graduated school, I really wanted to mix psychology and gaming, and the performance coaching thing was kind of like the first thing that I landed on. So I just kind of worked my way up in that aspect of things. That's how I first joined CLG, working as the performance coach for the LCS team, and eventually bridged into the head of player development there, where I kind of got into a lot of holistic training practices and using a lot of various research and multiple disciplines to kind of inform the decision making and the overall training design. So now at this point, as the director of team operations, I worked really hard to try to bring those more holistic training practices to all of our teams that are not LCS. And it's really interesting because those are predominantly remote teams. So it's been a new challenge to bring good training practices there.
Cool. Thanks. Edward, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Edward Cleland. I am a mind-body medicine practitioner. I am the performance specialist for 100 Thieves and Complexity Gaming. I work with many different games in this space, both on the player and the team level. I am the clinical director of MindBody Esports. It's a clinic in Metro Detroit, Michigan, where we focus on nutrition, mental health, team, individual, and lifestyle. And I'm happy to be here with you.
Cool. Last but not least, Cait.
Hi guys, I'm Cait. I'm a physical therapist. My undergraduate background is in neuroscience and exercise and sports science. I went on to get my doctorate in physical therapy from University of Delaware, go Blue Hens. I've been working in esports and orthopedics since 2015, and I co-own a company called 1HP. We provide health and performance services across a variety of disciplines to players, to teams, to schools, to community organizations. We don't just have PTs, we have PTs, registered dietitians, psychologists, and even a chiropractor on staff. And really kind of we use that same holistic approach that Summer is a big fan of, to make sure that we're helping players play more and hurt less. I've also published research in esports, specifically on tendinopathies and on the role of physical therapy in esports. And I'm the co-editor of the first ever clinical textbook on esports injuries, along with Dr. Lindsay Migliori and Dr. Melina Moore.
That's awesome. And one thing that's been abundantly clear, even in the last 5 minutes of us chatting, is we could have picked so many topics for this group to talk about, and it would have been so interesting, whether it be the effects of caffeine on esports performance or more on the physical therapy side of things. There's so much. But so today we're talking about injury prevention and longevity in esports. And I want to start off around it feels like every season in esports, there's 1 or 2 high profile players that either retire or take a break due to physical injury or mental burnout. We had UZI in League of Legends, more recently Zuma in Call of Duty. This obviously doesn't include all the players who are playing through their pain or their burnout, and it doesn't also include the players not being reported on. So I guess my first question is, how prevalent in all of your experiences are injuries and burnout at the pro levels of esports? And what are the most common ones? And if you have a story to share, feel free, but I'd love to start there.
I can kick us off on that front. Well, I'll definitely stick a little bit more to my lane, which is more of the physical medicine side of things. But when it comes to the prevalence of physical injuries in esports, I think there's kind of two sides to this. One is they're way more prevalent than we report on, than is available kind of publicly. For those of us who work with players, we hear all about the aches and pains, even the ones that don't rise to the level of a pathology of an injury that we would pathologize. But that's pretty darn common. And I think part of the reason why we experience so many more injuries when we work with players than players actually talk about, than the media reports on, isn't just that players don't talk about their injuries, which they don't, to be fair, but also because, let's say you were a traditional sports athlete. Let's say you'd played soccer growing up. Say you'd somehow made it through your entire soccer career without ever getting injured. You still would have seen a teammate or two get injured. You would have seen them go through some kind of rehab process, and you would have seen them get back to playing. We don't have that kind of model or that representation provided to us in esports. The people we hear about who are injured are the people who are so catastrophically injured that they have to retire or feel they can no longer play. Now, is some of that due to bad medical practices of doctors telling patients, just put a brace on it and don't play games for a while? Yeah, that's for sure part of it. But part of the reason why we don't hear as much about the kinds of injuries or the kinds of pains that are pre-injury levels of pain is because the only model that a lot of players have is injury equals I must stop playing. So of course you wouldn't want to talk about being injured. Of course you'd never want to disclose that because you'd be worried you'd lose your role. So I think a big hurdle that we're going to have to overcome in esports is talking about pain, non-pathological pain, and then actual injuries, and then the whole recovery process. Because if we're not talking about that, players aren't seeing that they can get back to playing, which plenty of the folks we work with do get back to playing. Summer can attest to that. We work with some of her players over at CLG. We've worked with some folks at Complexity as well. We've worked with Evil Geniuses. We've worked with Jordan Sai, who works over with Cloud9. There's plenty of players who have some amount of injury and are able to return to playing. But because we've got this big block around injury equals retirement, it's talked about so much less, and therefore players are willing to disclose injuries when they start to occur so much less often.
Hard to agree with that. Another cultural component that I see a lot, I mean, responding to your initial question, it was hard for me to answer only because for me, you'd be hard pressed to find a player that walks through the door that is not experiencing some degree of pain, psychological, physical, or otherwise. Like they're in pain because this is just really hard, right? And this is hard work that necessarily walking in the door trained how to do well, because it's not like we have like in traditional sport where you've been playing it in school or doing Pop Warner football, right? Like we've had people coaching you on how to do this in a healthy way from the onset of you learning how to play, right? So I guess the simple answer is that most people are injured in some way. The other thing is like there's a little bit of a cultural component to this where it's like that pain is part of the game, right? You should expect that your arm is going to burn by the end of the day because you've been using it. Duh. Like, so it's kind of like pushing against that aspect as well. Trying to say, hey, no, yes, it's normal for this to hurt when you do it that way. But perhaps there's another way that we can do this so that you cannot be harming yourself. And when we think about what that harm practically looks like, your arm hurting, your shoulders hurting, your neck hurting, lower back pain. And then of course there's always the honorable mention of eye fatigue, which a lot of people just like completely ignore altogether. That can be causing all kinds of things that you're like, oh, I have a headache, when really it's you needed to rest your eyes, right? So that's kind of the things that I'm predominantly saying.
I think what's also interesting here is how much do they know their bodies? How much time are they spending within their bodies? And this is a profession largely that's within the mind, or at least perceived to be in the mind. So if we're, not, as both of you just highlighted, if there isn't a system or a structure through youth to understand the role of the body within this, or even a self-awareness of what that body is experiencing when they're going through this, then how do we know if something is injury or if it's just fatigue or burn? So I think there's an education component that is lacking. And I think to both of your points, this feeling of I can be replaced, or if there isn't a rehab cycle that's in place. And as Cait said, I'll stay in my lane here. The mental aspect of this, but burnout's inevitable. Contextually speaking, I don't know that you can avoid this. You have to manage it in such a way. And we mentioned that a lot of the players, but also analysts, coaches, announcers, everyone seems to be experiencing burnout in esports, and that's more of an environmental thing, I think, than necessarily just the way it has to be. It's just the way it is, and certainly we'll see, I think, in the next generation of players, and I see that with the younger guys I'm working with. As they're coming up, there seems to be a little bit more awareness around it, maybe not in the traditional sports sense, but I think they expect the burnout topic to be there and the physical fitness topic to now be something, whereas 5-10 years ago, this wasn't even a discussion.
Absolutely.
One of the things that really stands out said that the lack of awareness around your body. And of course, this is true when it comes to physically injuring yourself, but also a bit around your mental injuries as well. If you are not aware that when you are under a lot of stress, that your shoulders are just up here next to your ears, then like you're not aware of that wear and tear that's going on your physical body because of your mental state, right? So there's a lot of ways that we wear that stress and anxiety on our bodies. And some of the most practical solutions I've actually found have been resolving that disconnect, right? So it's like, hey, when you are under stress, how do you default, right? This is all pre-programmed stuff. We all have habits associated with dealing with stress. Where do you wear it on your body? Because sure enough, even if it's not you clicking or moving your mouse, like you can also be damaging your body just by holding it in really awful ways. And the unique aspect of gaming is how easily it puts you in this flow state where you are so unaware of anything but what's happening in your screen. It's beautiful in that way, and it's why we're all so drawn to gaming. But you really do need to then be very purposeful about stepping away from the screen and then just examining yourself on a physical plane to figure out what's happening.
It's one of the things that we talked about kind of in the prior to this on video call. We were talking a bit about how one of the things that we deal with is when's the best time to intervene, and when's the best time to make changes, because it's so hard to make these kinds of changes in the middle of a season when your focus should be on your performance, right? If you've got a player who part of their wrist pain is coming from the fact that when they're using their mouse, they're ulnarly deviated pretty much all the time at rest. So anytime they try and flick further, they're running into their own space here. If we try and change that in the middle of the season, they're focusing on that change as opposed to focusing on their in-game performance, which is another hurdle, right? Because we want to make these changes as soon as possible. We want to make these habits so that the players don't have to think about it, so they can just focus on performance. But in order to make a change in the first place, you do have to pay that attention. And so when is the right time to intervene? How do we, prevent the pain, but also make sure that in treating and addressing the condition you have going on, we're not altering your performance in a detrimental way.
And that player associating that experience of, oh, I went to go change something for my health, but it made me play worse.
Made me play worse. So of course we never want to see a medical professional again if that's the case. It's such a balancing act for sure.
And for us, right, to walk in and say, hey, today we're going to meditate. Today we're going to work on the psychophysiology and understand. As Summer just said, what I like to tell my players is you're not just above the collarbone. Anything that you're stressed about in the mind is housed in the body. All mental stress is housed in the body. It's impossible to separate these two. In my background in holistic health education, mind-body medicine is the look of that. And psychophysiology is that. What is happening in the mind and the impact that it has on the body. So I really don't think that there's anything that we experience mentally that it doesn't have impact to the body.
One of the things that we know as well, I mean, to really hammer that point home, one of the things we know about low back pain in particular is that two of the things that are most commonly associated with the prevalence of low back pain is depression and anxiety, and with job dissatisfaction, which have absolutely nothing to do with what physical things you have put your body through, but as Edward and Summer have so aptly explained, what is happening in your head has an effect on your body, either in terms of you're stressed and therefore your shoulders rise up and therefore you get tightness in your upper traps and therefore you get trigger points and pain and headaches, or just in terms of how you take care of yourself, which again really goes back to that concept of how important education is in this space at a variety of ages. And since we've talked about some of the hurdles we've dealt with in trying to provide that education, make those changes, if you've made it to the absolute pinnacle of esports, if you are a tier 1 competitor and you made it all the way there without ever having to consult a healthcare professional along the way, why the heck would you ever listen to one once you've gotten there? You did it all by yourself. You don't need this person. Who is this person coming in and telling you to change things and do things differently when the things you were doing were just fine? And how do you know where they were just fine? Well, you got to the top doing those things. So one of the things that we've really been trying to work on is making sure that we're providing contextually valuable education that makes sense for where the person is at the time. So, for our younger players, our high school students who want to go pro in esports at some point, that kind of education might be more, let's get you started with the basics and build you up along the way. For someone who's already at the top of their game, it might be, okay, what things matter to you? What do you perceive as being a problem? Oh, you're worried about your sleep. Sure, let's talk about how we improve your sleep. And while we're talking about how we improve your sleep, well, it turns out doing, some amount of physical activity during the day is going to help with your sleep. What's that? Doing that physical activity resulted in less back pain for you while you're playing? Hey, let's talk about ergonomics. And it's really tying things in to what matters most to a player and what's going to have the most impact, which isn't always just what you as the medical professional think is the most impactful.
Well, and so I think that education kind of ties nicely into kind of a follow-up question here, where I think we've established very clearly that okay, injuries and burnout and like these are very prevalent, way more prevalent than anyone probably knows looking in on the industry from outside of it. But what would be some of the strategies that you have all used for preventing and treating these challenges? And again, I think education is a big part of preventing a lot of this, but you see in traditional sports, especially right now, there's a lot of money that these top tier athletes are putting into making sure they never get injured and making sure that they can perform well into their 40s in some cases. If you're looking at Tom Brady and as LeBron James continues to age, they've spent millions of dollars every year on their health to prevent injury. And so I'd be curious to hear from all of you, what are some of the things that maybe some of your athletes are doing or that you would recommend the athletes be doing to prevent some of these things?
Kind of like what Cait said, and I think we should start off with this idea of starting small and building from there. When you have an athlete, and my spectrum is from 17-year-olds, and sometimes younger, but professionally speaking, 17-year-olds to 32-year-olds. And so it's kind of Cait just mentioned, if you have someone who's maybe in the later stages or they're a seasoned veteran, maybe these discussions are a little bit easier. It's about sustaining their career. It's about keeping them where they are. And I think not that they're necessarily more open to that discussion, but it is difficult. We all remember being 18 years old. If someone told me at 18, do this so you live a long life, I think they're nuts. What do I care about that right now? So I really look at yeah, right. I really look at, and I pull it away from some of the nomenclature around it, but I look at the idea of microdosing. What's something that we can do in a really small dosage that will feel good to you, whether it's, a 5-minute meditation, a brief yoga session, something that has almost an immediate impact. We use nature a lot and sunlight, team activities, but something that brings some joy. I mean, heaven forbid we have some fun in esports, and joy relieves pain as well. So I think starting small and making sure that it's something that feels very accessible and easy to approach. There's some in my clinic that have these huge, grandiose ideas, and I love the idea of it. But I really like the idea of biting off something really small. So maybe at 100 Thieves, we do yoga every day. I mean, that's one thing we do every single morning. We do yoga as a team. We go on team walks together every day. We eat together as a team. We have these open discussions about how we feel and how our bodies feel. And I think those are kind of entry points. It's challenging. You really do need to make it about having fun and feeling something that's a positive that you can take away from, I think, on the immediate.
I would say like that's even true outside the team environment. Like not everyone's on a pro team, right? There's some gamers at home that just like want to know like what to be doing. And I think just having these conversations in a friendly manner are really, really important. Of course, at the pro level, us as coaches, we want to explain this to our players and provide that education, and we will absolutely continue to do so. But it can't stop there, right? We do need our players to continue the conversation amongst themselves. And, when a teammate says like, damn, like my arm is sore, being like, well, have you called Cait? Right? Just really
Yeah.
trying to create that encouragement. Because in my experience, it's not just a lack of awareness. Like there's definitely a lack of awareness. For instance, like I remember going out to Korea, boot camping with a Korean player and having these burnout conversations. And at the end of it, he came to me, he's like, Summer, this is crazy. I've definitely felt these things, but there's no word for this in Korean, right? Like now I know I can call it burnout and I've been feeling this, but there's literally just never been a word, right? So being able to name the pain is really huge. And additionally, you want to remove the shame from not doing better, especially as people are becoming more aware. That guy's gonna be like, yeah, I don't drink enough water, I barely get sleep, I don't exercise, and all of it feels super overwhelming. And they feel like if they go to certain practitioners, they're just gonna get a lecture about all these things that they should be doing. Um, and I do my best to be like, listen, I don't care about the shoulds. Like a phrase I use all the time is don't shit on yourself. Okay. Like
Yes.
it's just not
Don't
pretty.
shit all over yourself.
It's not pretty, man. So we just got to find the thing that works for you, right? If it's like, can I just put a cup of water on your desk and like maybe you'll drink it? If that's the thing, awesome, right? Just like finding these super simple things. And as a coach, if I can help with a practical intervention, then that's what it's going to be.
And we've all mentioned the word holism, right? We've all mentioned the word holistic. So I think it's so important that we meet that player where they are.
Mhm.
Some players naturally feel comfortable going to the gym and hitting weights. And when they do that, their confidence is through the roof and their injury prevention's improved and they feel less burnout and they, can sustain that. But for some, that's not really an option. So I think meeting them where they are, and as Summer just said, finding something that's really accessible. It doesn't need to be, don't go to a practitioner that tells you you need to revamp your entire life. Find someone that can help you, find someone that can help you move in a direction where you're taking steps towards something positive. And then, find ways to kind of maintain that without the pressure of like, this needs to get bigger.
Mhm.
I need to do more. I need to get something bigger accomplished. I love the idea of a 7-minute gym session or just a walk down the street. It doesn't need to be a marathon. It doesn't need to be a powerlifting session for 2 hours. In brain chemistry, by the way, if you spend just 60 seconds working out, the brain chemistry benefits that you're getting from that 60 seconds, and while not 100% of the same benefit in brain chemistry that you're getting from a long session, it is more than 50% of the benefit. So
Right.
even if you just do, and there's some tremendous studies on this, but even if you just do a set of pull-ups or some downward dogs or some breathing exercises for 1 or 2 minutes, chemically speaking, you're changing your entire makeup. So it's not necessarily about doing something grandiose. It's about letting go of the idea of that's what's necessary.
Mhm.
As we talk we talk a lot about Zen and Taoism and with my teams, and we talk about quit trying to solve the why of the question and start letting go of the question itself. Quit trying to figure out how to do this perfectly and just do something that makes you feel better. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing right now is that as these gamers are starting to learn about, what maybe the optimal path looks like, they start saying, well, I'm nowhere near the optimal path. I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating healthy. I'm not hydrating. I'm not, taking my supplements. And really, it's not necessary for you to do all of the things. It's necessary for you to move in a direction.
You said two really key words that speak to me and what I see, which is optimal and perfect. Um, and when you are working with elite athletes, you got to be careful when you use these words because they're going to cling to them. Part of what got them to where they are is like an unrelenting chase of perfection in their craft. So if you are trying to teach them something, if you're trying to say, hey, your craft is going to get better by doing these things, they're already like, yes. And if you take a perfectionist and say, hey, there's another thing that you can perfect, which is like your health, they're really going to cling to that in potentially a really unhealthy way.
Yeah.
So it's important that, like, as this entire conversation is about, that you are taking small steps, and you can have this perfect image in mind on one side, and you can have the worst image on the other. And your only job is to say, hey, is something I'm doing, can I tick it on this column or that column? Is this getting me closer to that perfect self that I really want? Or is this putting me towards that awful self I want to avoid? And that's the only decision that you need to make. And it simplifies it so much. So I am a recovering perfectionist myself. So this is a trick that I use. So I give that to everyone who is struggling with that optimal chase, I guess.
I've found, rather than framing it as that saying of don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because you're right, so many of the folks that we work with are perfectionists, and they're like, no, I want to be perfect, I have to be perfect. It's instead reframing it as anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, which is to say, going for a 5-minute walk isn't as good as going for a 30-minute run, but it's sure a heck of a lot better than not going for any walk at all. Doing 10 push-ups might not be meeting your goal of being able to do 50, but it's better than doing 0 push-ups. And so really highlighting the accessibility, the kind of smaller changes that you can build up on over time makes it that much more easy for folks to actually change. And yeah, there's definitely that hurdle we run into of so many of the players we work with want to change everything all at once. They want to make these big drastic changes. And as humans, we want to make big drastic changes, right? It's why we go on crash diets and why we go crazy redecorating spaces. When a lot of what we really needed isn't so much that big drastic change, it's we needed to work on small accessible things to get there in the first place. It's why crash diets don't work. You can stick with them for about 3 days, maybe 2 weeks if you're really good at it. But then after that, you're reverting right back to what you were doing because you haven't done anything to change your relationship with food, how you think about food or how you think about your body. Instead, you've just, well, tried something unsustainable and found out good news, it's unsustainable. So like Summer was saying, instead of trying to make all of these changes all at once, having the players fail and feel, well, I failed, I can't possibly do this thing, I give up entirely. Set smaller, more achievable goals. Set a 20-ounce water bottle on the table and say, okay, by the time I'm done with my morning practice, I'm going to have drank that entire water bottle. Set yourself a goal of, I'm going to go for a 5-minute walk every day this week. Would it be great if, like, somewhere down the line you decided you maybe wanted to do more? Sure, but these choices aren't an escalator. You're not locked
And that's
into
the trap,
escalating
right?
versions here.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because isn't that the trap though? Because if we look at something like I went for the 5-minute walk and then we compare it to the longer version, then we might not view it as a success. And I think it's so important that we make sure that we continue to destigmatize like the idea of needing to be perfect. I don't know what perfect really looks like, but to move forward, I think we have to just stop the comparisons against other things. It's not a comparison against what a different athlete can do differently or what you might do in the future. It's about what you're doing right now. It's about being in the present right now. And as Summer said, putting a check mark on the right side of the column instead of comparing ourselves against maybe what an ideal is. It's about making sure we're moving in a direction.
Especially
If you
when
do a good thing, is the thing objectively good? Great. You have accomplished something worthwhile. I saw someone in chat talking about, implementing a dog into the team to, get them out of the house, take the dog for a walk. One of the most successful interventions we ever did was we got an Overwatch team to play a weekly game of kickball, which is like, it's fun, it's activity, it's team bonding. And it got some of the folks, like, because they're competitive as heck, because who isn't competitive as heck in esports, be like, well, I want to be able to kick that ball harder. What kind of exercises can I do for my legs? Or I want to be able to run around the bases faster. What exercises can I do? Again, it's meeting players where they're at. It's finding something that matters and is interesting to them, and then finding the small, sustainable changes. And sustainable is super key here because it has to fit the life that they have. It can't be such a big, drastic change that it pulls them out of who they are. It has to fit around their life, their season, their particular activity, which is why it's really great when we can make these interventions not just individual players, but with whole teams, because then we can have a team culture of supporting these small, healthy changes and making it possible and sustainable for the players to do.
Yeah. And my last thing that I want to add to this particular thing is I want to bring it full circle to injury, because this mindset is actually really important for someone who's recovering, right? You cannot have the comparison in your head of who you were at your peak when you are actually trying to take care of yourself and recover properly, right? You're going to be taking a step back. You're going to be putting your energies into other things. And as a result, you are not going to see the same reality that you had when you were putting everything into your gaming capabilities. So being able to have this more kind eye toward yourself and eliminating these comparisons is not just important in terms of sustainability, but also, in the event that you do need to refocus that energy and get yourself healthy, you need to have this mindset.
I love that.
Summer, also, right? You got to the
You're-
injury because of what you did to get there, right? So this idea of like, I'm going to go back around the circle, that's the standard American injury cycle. That's what it is. That's what most athletes do. They get injured, they rehab, and they injure again.
Right.
know?
If you didn't change what was causing the injury in the first
Mhm.
place, it's just going to happen again once you've recovered. So it has to be, again, that what we've really been harping on this whole time, it has to be that more holistic intervention of, sure, we're addressing the symptom you're presenting with, and then we're addressing the underlying causes of it as well. When it comes to physical medicine, that could be ergonomics, it could be general activity levels, it could have to do with your nutrition, it might have to do with your sleep. One of the things we know about pain is that it is heavily, heavily linked to sleep. There's this really vicious cycle where decreased sleep lowers your pain threshold, which makes you have more pain, which makes it harder to sleep, which lowers your pain threshold. And so being able to intervene somewhere in that vicious cycle can make such a huge difference. And God, we're also terrible at sleeping. Like for a species that spends, a third of our lives asleep, we're really bad at it for the most part.
And
Grudgingly asleep.
esports doesn't set us up well, right? Esports doesn't set us up well for this. We were home last night at 2 a.m. from our Valorant match in Berlin. And then we're wired, and it's 2 a.m. And I was the first one to go to bed, and it was 4 a.m.
Right. And then on
I'm
top
sorry?
of that, you've got the time zone issues, you've got the weird schedules, you've got things always running late at tournaments. It's why one of the areas of research that I love drawing from the most is the research on third shift workers. So folks who do like overnight shifts, because it's so very applicable in esports. And obviously our sleep psychologist, Daniel Bonner, could talk a lot more about this than I can. But one of the things that we know is that those disrupted sleep patterns don't just affect sleep quantity, they affect sleep quality, which affects a whole bunch of factors in the body, including but not limited to the production of human growth hormone, which is one of the things your body uses to repair itself, both in terms of musculoskeletal health, but also in terms of immune function. And so there's a lot of research that supports that not only does getting less sleep significantly increase your risk of injury and illness, but getting extra sleep actually boosts performance. There was a really great study out of Duke on their basketball team, and they found that giving the players an extra hour of sleep a night, having them sleep 9 hours instead of 8 hours, resulted in faster reaction times, better strategic decision making, a lot better emotional regulation, which surprises absolutely nobody because everybody else gets cranky when they're sleepy. But there's such a huge impact that's made with this one simple intervention: focus on sleep. And that's one that it seems a lot of esports players are a little more open to. Like I think there's a recognition culturally that we're bad at sleep in esports, and so there's a little more openness to maybe we could change this thing.
Even the League of Legends guys who are just grinding all day, even they think, yeah, my sleep is off. I got to get those 8 hours, and I'll play the other 16, right? Yeah.
I love that. I love the theme that kept coming up there was just the small interventions, and whether that's like increase your sleep every week like by 1 hour a day, or like make sure you have water on your desk, like that all these things have massive health and performance implications, but they're super easy to do for anyone, whether you're a pro athlete or just a casual gamer. I want to take a pivot for our last question here, and I want to see, so what do you all think that teams or leagues need to do to better support their athletes and create a more sustainable competitive space? Is it just as simple as like better scheduling of these tournaments? Edward, you said that the tournament you weren't done until 11 p.m., or do you have other ideas of how the industry, and so it isn't a team to team or athlete to athlete solution, but how can we as an industry get better and set these systems in place so that everyone can have longer, more successful and healthy careers?
I do think it's not simple. For starters, it's not a simple solve. the industry is not currently set up just as a community to support all of these interventions. It's more or less, and I give a lot of credit to the orgs I've worked with at 100 Thieves and Complexity and Renegades and others, because their management and their leadership are the ones that have buy-in and they believe in it, and therefore they brought it on. I haven't seen when I'm at Riot events or others, and people ask me, "Oh, you're the team mental health coach and team practitioner," and they say, "Man, I wish every team had one of those." And we look around, and it's just not there yet. I do think it's getting there. The players still seem to be very much contextually controlled by the situation. It's not like the players have much say in it, and I'm not trying to start any arguments there for the players or anything, but it just seems like the entire environment around it is not set up for them. And our third map last night started after midnight. So if the guys are up at 9 a.m. having breakfast together and then they're having to perform optimally post midnight, if we don't have those practices intrinsically as an org or as a team or as individuals, it doesn't exist community wide. I mean, it's just not there yet. I do think in 5 years from now, the idea of starting a map after midnight and hoping we get best product probably won't be happening as much. I can't imagine. But I think right now it seems like it's on the individuals, and maybe that's just my limited experience and the niches I've been. But I just generally think if they didn't buy in, then if the org didn't buy in, I don't know that I would be there. Because even though the players find great benefit from me, and they, thankfully they speak highly of me to their bosses and what have you. But still, it's really by the org. It's really by the org and what's their identity and what's their value on it. I do believe, though, in 5 years from now, this conversation will take a pivot, and every org will be kind of identifying how they want to do it on their own.
I hard agree. I think from the organizational standpoint, you need to be willing to do this for your players in spite of your bottom line. Obviously, there's the argument that this
That's
is
huge.
good for their performance and good for their overall well-being, right? So it's not a hard argument to make, but even if it weren't the case, even if it cost you more, you have to be willing to be your own conscience in a situation like this. You cannot allow people who are in your charge to become victims of, quite frankly, the entertainment industry, right? Like at the end of the day, we do what we do for entertainment. Like fans drive a lot of our value. That's why you're playing a game at midnight, because someone's watching at midnight and they want to watch
Exactly.
at midnight.
Yeah.
And that fan doesn't know that you're barely getting sleep and you're doing the absolute best you can. And then you lose and make really awful mistakes that they're like, why am I even a fan of you anymore? Like, this is the toxic cycle that players are stuck in, right? They're being
Or how about you're getting paid, suck it up, or you're getting
Yeah.
paid for this, and it's a dream job,
Right.
and they hear that a lot, and they go, "Well, it's a dream job, but I haven't seen my family in 2 years.
Right.
I can't go
Right.
back to my homeland, and it's a dream job, but I live in a hotel for 2 years at a time." So I mean, it's complex. Yeah,
You can't lose
completely.
You can't lose sight of the humanity of it all. I think we all just kind of like in the esport industry constantly have to come back to that. You can't just I mean, I'm not going to throw a tournament organizer under the bus, but when I look at Fortnite tournaments that just go on for hours and hours and hours, and we can't even build in a 5-minute break for someone to stand up and go to the bathroom, like I have players who are minors who are literally just trying to run to the bathroom and get back, and that's all they have. That's the only movement that they have in an entire tournament, where they're just glued to their screen. Like that's not good. When you're drawing really younger gamers like that, like we need to do better for them, right? Can we just agree on
Well,
something like that?
And then the question I have for Cait as the researcher, and I'm a PhD student myself, so I'm a researcher too, but not published yet. How do we quantify this? When I was working for Fortune 100s in corporate wellness, one of the first things the CEO would ask me is, "What's the bottom line on this? How can I measure that this impacts our bottom line?" And if I'm sitting there with John at 100 Thieves or Jason, and they say, "Well, Edward, what's the value to our bottom line on this?" It's subjective. It's qualitative. I have a really difficult time sitting there and saying, "Well, this is exactly what you should expect, and this is how to quantify all of these interventions that we're instilling." It's a difficult thing to actually position.
One of the things that we can, and obviously a lot of this is subjective. One of the things that we can do to provide some amount of quantification, some amount of, just hard data that we can provide to somebody, we can look at the amount of injuries that happen within a year, although we're recognizing that at least at the beginning of things, much like with the increased prevalence of autism, it's not so much about, these injuries are happening more often as it is we're identifying these things happening more often. We'll probably see an initial spike in the reported prevalence of injuries as more medical professionals get into the scene and start doing research. We can look at, do these interventions reduce the prevalence of injuries over time, so over a 1 to 2 year period? Again, a fairly long period of time, in esports, relatively speaking. We can look at things like when players are out, how long are they out for with their injury? Are they able to come back sooner? Do they spend less time recovering? We can look at things like, we can make an approximation, although this one's a little rougher, in terms of what does this cost the team for this player to be out. We can't guarantee that this team would have won a tournament if this player versus their substitute was here. But if they've lost the tournament and they didn't have one of their star players because they were injured, well, we can definitely include that in a general subjective write-up of we suspect they would have done better if they'd had this top-tier player. But that is the problem with a lot of this. So much of this is subjective. And a lot of the research that we need before we can even start making statements about the role and value of what we do, as much as we anecdotally see it, the plural of anecdote is not data, and teams want data. So we need first prevalence and incidence studies on injuries in esports. Then we need interventional studies to see what kind of things result in changes that are actually meaningful. We need to be able to define what those meaningful changes are. Is it frequency? Is it amount of injuries? Is it how long those injuries take people out for? Is it how often people are actually talking about their injuries? There's a whole host of things we could and should be measuring. But we have to start with, and much like we have to start with players with something simple and accessible, we have to start with research with something straightforward and accessible. And right now we need to quantify the number of injuries that are actually happening. Mm-hmm. We can't do all that much else to build on it until we've established those things to start with.
And seeing as I'm working in mental burnout, trying to quantify or measure that in mental burnout, I mean, we have scales for it, we have processes and intakes for it, but even then you're asking a player of different cultures to fill out self-assessments.
Right, and there's there's a huge variation in the cultural validity of various outcome assessments. And then Summer, you can speak to this a little as well, I'm sure. But one of the things that we do is we do a write-up at the end of a season on, here's the injuries that we dealt with. Here are the non-injury related health changes we helped players make. So that we can at least provide something to the teams saying, here are the things that we did concretely. Here are the reports from the players of how they feel about the things that we did. And here are the observations of the coaches on the things that we did. Is it subjective? Yes. Is it coming from people who have trust capital within that community and therefore it's taken more seriously? Also, yes. But to what you said, Edward, the players can give all the positive reports in the world, but orgs are very often having to make decisions based on the financial bottom line, which I understand. This is a business. And it's really, really tough because we'd love to be able to give that more long-term view of, sure, the interventions we're doing in this particular season did not result in massive changes that you saw. You didn't see faster reaction times. You didn't see more victories than you saw last year. But you're going to have these players that are able to play for 5 years longer than they would have. We can't prove that yet because it's not 5 years longer than when you expected them to retire yet.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, we're moving on from that player next season anyway. It's tricky.
What I'm kind of noticing, I mean, it's from the org level, player level, it's at every level. If you're talking to a tournament organizer, we do need to kind of go back to, can we actually redefine what is stressful? Like, what is actually causing strain on a player in the system? If that is one of the things, like that key disconnect is one of the more challenging things when you're trying to explain why these interventions are necessary to someone looking at the bottom line. And they're like, to someone walking into a room, even at the pro level, they just see people sitting all day and they're like, that's not stressful, right? Like they're relaxed, right? You see somebody just like sitting back in their chair and you think that's not strain, but that's somebody sitting back in their chair in that position, locking it all day. Like any position you hold all day is going to suck. Like you can ride a bike all day and like just because you're exercising doesn't mean like at the end of it you're feeling comfortable, right? Like this is like, you have to understand like what is actually causing stress on the body and on the mind. And another very simple example I can give is one thing that I pointed out at the end of a season was for two coaches. I noticed that they were sitting with their desks back to back, right? But they were so close that in order for one person to turn around and talk to the team, they had to collide their chair into the other coach. Now, like, let's just think about this in the heat of a stressful season. And can you imagine trying to work with a coworker where every single time you tried to move to do your job, you hit your chair into the person? Like, it's such a small thing, but like, you can say, like, I probably ran my chair into this dude 1,000 times over the course of this season just to do a simple thing like give advice to a player. That is stressful. That is something that makes me not like that guy. And it's so easily overlooked when you're just looking at a bottom line or at a spreadsheet. Like, you just need to get on a human level to understand like what is causing strain.
So I could sit here and listen to this all day long, but
I feel like we could probably do this all day long.
I feel
given
like
the
we
three of
could,
us.
and we might have to do a follow-up
We might have
panel
to.
down
I
the
think we should.
line. But
Lord.
I think we're going to call it there because we're all busy, and I think this has been a really great start to or a continuation of what is a very important conversation here in this industry. So I want to thank you all again, Edward, Cait, and Summer. I have so appreciated your insight and experience on these topics, and appreciate your time here with us today. A reminder for chat that next Monday we're going to be back at it for the Performance Psychology in Esports panel. So please follow us on Twitch or on social media to make sure you don't miss out on that. And thank you all for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.